Okay, hi everybody. This is Paul of Pandemonium Miniatures, and this video is how I painted this Mounted Squire. It's part of the Mounted Squires set of the 100 Kingdoms faction in Conquest, the Last Argument of Kings by Para Bellum Wargames, and the set of 3 Mounted Squires was given to me by Para Bellum so that I could create some content with them. What you're about to see is the step-by-step of painting the horse and the figure, including basing. Okay, so to begin with, I've undercoated both models in black. What I've done with the rider, I can see he's suffering the indignity of having a pin in his groin, holding him in place on this cork. And I've also given him a coat of Vallejo metal colour steel all over. I did that with all the riders, but actually, of all the riders, this one's got the least metal on him, but it doesn't matter. It's just a case of it saves me a bit of time having to separately base coat all of the metal areas. So what I'm going to do first of all with him is I'll give him an all over wash of a thin down mix of Drakenhof Nightshade and Nuln Oil. I quite like that blue-black wash. So all of the metal areas are going to get that. I might as well do the whole model, to be honest, because it does give me a little bit more definition in some of the details, which is useful for later when I'm painting. And I'm doing this first because while I'm demonstrating the horse, it will give this time to dry and I can move on to him afterwards. So I'm using a size 3 brush here, and it's quite thin down. Although I'm working quite quickly, I'm being pretty controlled about it, and I'm not letting it pool or run. Cool. So put him to one side and I'll move straight onto the horse. So this is going to be a bay horse, so kind of a deep brown, almost edging into chestnut. And what I'm going to do is give all of the skin areas or the flesh areas, I'm going to give them a coat of a mix of Rhinox hide and Instar black, and that will provide me with a good grounding for building up highlights. So again, I'm using a size 3 brush, which enables me to cover ground quite quickly, but also provides me with a decent degree of control. Another way you could do this is to go from a Rhinox hide base and then shade it down with either Agrax Earthshade or Null Oil, but for a large model like this, you'll end up having to do quite a lot of I suppose repair work to get rid of the staining from the wash, so it's just not kind of isn't worth it. There we go. And then I'll also pour out some pure black, and I'll base coat the mane and the tail with that. I'll just thin that down a little bit. Now, you'll notice I'm doing black on black. Well, the black primer is so matte that it actually comes out almost dark grey. It doesn't read as black, whereas the Instar Pure Black has got a deep sort of lustrousness to it, which is a much nicer finish. Cool. Right, I'll leave that to dry and then we'll move on to the next bit. Alright, while I was off camera, I also gave the base a coat of dryad bark, including the log. So this log is a resin piece from Model Scenery Products. Just adds a little bit more detail and interest. So the next stage I'm going to do for the horse is I'm using pure Rhinox hide, and still with a number 3 brush, I'm going to apply it, concentrating on the raised areas so you can see where all the muscle definition is. And what I want to do is leave the recesses as dark as possible with that black and brown mix. So I'm just bringing the colour along. And leaving that line there between the muscles. And as I progress, adding lighter shades of brown, that definition is going to come more apparent, and it'll really start to bring the horse to life. They're very nicely sculpted horses and they're very dynamic. I really like what they've done with them. And don't forget the insides of the legs as well. Thing is, with a model that's got a reasonably large surface area, sometimes it's really easy to develop almost a blind spot and leave out bits. So it's just checking back on yourself, really. Cool. So I'll do the other side off camera, and then I'll come back to you for the next stage. So what I thought I'd do next, before I go any further, is to just dry brush some texture onto this log on the base. So I've just mixed up a couple of shades using Vallejo Ivory into the dryad bark, just to create a two-stage dry brush. So I'm just going to add that to the tip of my brush, wipe off the excess, and then just gently dry brush that on. A lot of people, when they're dry brushing, they reckon that what they really need to do is scrub at it, but actually you can go very gentle, and for one thing you don't risk rubbing off any paint, and for another you get a much more subtle effect, much more controlled. And all I really want to do is just pick up some of that bark texture, so I'm not going to go too extensive with it. That'll do. So for the horse, back to the horse, I've now mixed in some Mournfang brown into the Rhinox hide, and I'm switching down to a size 2 brush. And in a similar way, I'm going to concentrate on the raised areas, but even more so, I want to kind of get a gradiated shadow to really accentuate the volumes of the muscles here. Okay, so that's why I've switched down sizes. It just gives me just that little bit more control to get the paint exactly where I want it. Now sometimes when you are highlighting up like this, the contrast might seem a little stark when the paint's wet, but once it's dried it really blends back down and becomes a lot more subtle. Just above the eyelid there, on the back of the ear, across the nostril, like that. And then I'll move down to the base of the neck that's just in between the two straps here. And then onto the shoulder muscle. onto the belly, then onto the knee. And this muscle group here. Again, not forgetting the back of the leg, the inside of the leg rather. But I don't need to go too detailed with that because it's very hidden really. Just on this back muscle here, not forgetting the haunch. Okay, so I'll do the other side of the horse and I'll come back to you for the next level of highlighting. So next I'm just going to use pure Mournfang Brown. Just to build up those volumes. Just get in under that armour plate there. Okay, so I'll do the other side. Then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to glaze down those colours with that Mournfang and Rhinox hide mix, just to create a bit more subtlety. Okay, so yeah, it didn't come out quite as subtle as I might like, so I'm simply just going to use that mix to just glaze in and tone it down a little. That sort of reworks it, so I'll do that all over the model and then come back again. Okay, so I've just glazed that in, which has made it slightly more subtle. So while it's still a bit wet, I'm just going to wet blend back in with the Mournfang Brown. That's much more the effect I was after. I think it stemmed from I hadn't quite thinned the Mournfang quite enough, but it was clearly something that was easily rectified, so that's all good. I think half the battle is learning how to sort out mistakes. I think that's like that with a lot of art and craft based stuff, to be honest. So all of the stages pretty much from now on are going to be wet blended, so there won't be really any gaps while I'm waiting for paint to dry. Okay, so into that Mournfang Brown, I'm now just going to mix a little bit of this base XV88, just a sort of I suppose it's a yellowy brown. Left some to one side for later, and just blend it in a little bit there. Just add a little bit more water. Okay. And I'll just carefully highlight all the muscles with that. Not going all the way, but really just thinking about where the light is hitting from the top. So it's going to be going along this edge of this muscle. And a little bit along there. Into the jaw there. Probably hit there. Certainly the eyelid. Certainly the back of the ear. Across the nostril. Top half of this muscle, but not the bottom. Definitely the knee. definitely where the hide meets the hoof as well. Top of this muscle, along the edge of that ankle, shin I suppose. And I'll do the other side in a similar way. And then I'm going to mix a little bit more of the XV88 in, being quite controlled. And then I'm going to revisit those areas I've just highlighted with a thinner line of the colour. I'll do the other side. And next I'm going to use the pure XV88 very selectively. Just on areas like the tips of the ears, around the edge of the nostril, the eyelid, the jawline, and just a very, very fine line on some of the muscles. And also a highlight on the knees, and the base of the ankle, just around the base of the hoof there. Top of the hoof, I should say. So that's really, this stage has really sharpened up the definition. Nice. And just one last highlight, I'm just going to add a bit of ivory into this. And I'm really just going to concentrate on very, very small areas, just to define the tips of the ears. Just along the eyelid and the top edge of the nostril. And just a little bit just where the ankle meets the hoof. Tiny little bit on the back of the jaw. And I'll thin it down and just apply a very small amount to the knees. And that'll do now, nicely. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the straps now. Now I've already got some black on my wet palette, so I'm going to add in a bit of Incubi Darkness. So I've almost got a kind of a bluish black. I'll put some there for later. So I'm just going to apply that to all of the areas that I've painted black, or the ones, the bits that I want to be left black. So that's going to include the tail, the mane, the saddle, and this area of leather armour here, and all of the straps and the reins, etc. Also the hooves, particularly where I've just veered into them a little bit with the brown. It will just neaten it up a bit. And it just redefines them because I've cut in a little bit across them with the brown. which almost couldn't be helped using such a large brush in the first instance, but it doesn't kind of matter because it can just be retouched very easily. I've mentioned it before in another video, but you can see I'm holding my brush very close to the tip. For myself, I find that it gives me more brush control. Other people prefer to hold their brush much more in the middle or towards the end. Certainly when I used to do canvas painting, I used to hold my brush quite far to the end, but for me, for miniature painting, I prefer this this grip. There we go. Then I've got the pure Ink by Darkness, so I'm going to use that to define edges, start to define the edges. So I'm going to go along the edges of all the straps with a relatively thick line. And again, the contrast seems stark when you first apply the paint, but once it's dried, it blends down in. Just going to go around the saddle as well. Okay, so I'll work my way through all of that, including the mane and the tail, and then I'll come back. So next I'm using Thunderhawk Blue for a second stage of highlights on these black areas. And I'm going for a thinner line. So I'll do that all the way around, but just to show you what I'll do after that, I'll just, on a couple of areas now, I'll add in Firenzian grey, and that will be the last highlight on the black. And again, going for quite a fine line, edge highlighting. Get it all nice and sharp. Just carefully along this edge. So yeah, so you can see that's starting to define it quite nicely. So I'll do that for the whole model, and then I'll move on to the red cloth. So moving on to the red cloth, I've just mixed together Nagaroth Night and Corn Red to give it a nice, deep, rich base coat. And I'm switching back up to my size 3 brush. And I'm just going to apply this to the areas that I want red. So you can see, even though it's a large brush, it comes to a very nice point, and I can just cut in, get the paint exactly where I want it. And you can see that I'm constantly turning the model around to get the best angle. To apply the colour. Okay, so that's one side. Just do the other side. And then I'm going to switch back down to a size 2 brush, and I'm going to use pure Corn Red. And I'm applying this to the raised areas of cloth, leaving the purple and red mix in the shadows. And I'll just leave a line of that purple and red in the recess here as well, just to create more definition. we go. Then I'm going to get some Mephiston red and mix it into the corn red. And again, apply that to the raised areas, but working on smaller areas this time. So I'm kind of creating a gradation of shade and highlight. Nice. Then I'm going to use pure Mephiston. On even smaller areas, as you can see. Then what I'm going to do is going to mix in some Fire Dragon Bright into that red. So it's a fairly garish orange, but despite that, it will still blend down into the red quite nicely. So that's the sort of shade I'm going for. I'll just highlight all of the cloth with that in thin lines. just add in a little bit more orange. Just to bring that up a little, just a shade more. And then finally, I'm going to go around with the pure orange around the edges of the cloth. And just onto the sharpest highlights. There we go, that'll do. So now I want to pick out the metal. So there's a few rivets, there's belt buckles, there's rings around the bridle. So to do that, I'm going to give that a base coat of Vallejo oily steel. So there's buckles on the saddlebags. And then there's little rings attached to these tassels here. Well, I'm calling them tassels, I don't really know what they are. And then there's rivets on some of the straps there as well. There's also the armour plates. there's some strapping here around the tail, but I think rather than do those silver, I think I might pick that out in gold. So I'll give all of these metal areas a couple of coats of silver just to get them nice and flat, and then I'll move on to shading those. So I'm just going to shade those metal areas down a little bit, and to do that I'm going to use that same black and blue mix that I used on the figure earlier, which was Drakenhof Nightshade and Nuln Oil. So I'm just going to apply that quite thinly on the armour plates. Just drag off any excess to prevent it pooling. And then around these rivets, buckles and rings. And you can see I picked out those rings around the tail in gold like I said it was going to. I used Retributor armour for that. Good. So once that's dry, then I'll just give that a quick highlight with Vallejo Silver. But while I'm waiting for that to dry, it shouldn't take too long because it's only a thin coat and it's a warm day. I'm just going to put some Liberator Armour Gold onto the palette, just a little bit. And I'm just going to use that to highlight those gold rings. Nice. And then I'll use silver as a final highlight for the gold. That's, oops, it's just coming detached from the cork. Sort that out. And I'll just highlight all the silver bits with this nice bright silver. And I'll also work it around the edges of the arm plates and along this front edge. And that is basically it for the horse. The only thing I need to just do now is add the base texture and then put it to one side to dry while I work on the rider. So for the base texture, I'm using this Vallejo Earth texture, Dark Earth. And you can see it's a pre-coloured textured paint. So I'm going to use a very old brush to apply that. Took a while to find that. Okay, so yeah, I'm going to use a flat brush and I'm just going to apply that to the base. You can see it's quite thick, but unlike some brands, it really paints on quite well. You don't really need a spatula or any kind of special texture paint tool. So I'm just going to work that in around that log. Around the hooves without getting paint onto them, if I can possibly help it. Work it into that little gap lastly. There we go. So put the horse to one side for the moment and I will now concentrate on the rider. So for the rider, the very first thing I'm going to do is use that bright silver and just very lightly dry brush that to create the highlights of the armour. So if you remember near the beginning, right at the beginning, I gave the whole figure a wash of blue and black mix. So now I'm just going to use my dry brush to pick up on all the texture. Obviously there's no point in me dry brushing any areas that aren't metal. He's got one armoured arm and the other one is cloth. So there we are, so that will do. So very first thing I'm going to do with this figure is use that purple and red mix, the Corn Red and Nagaroth Night. I'm going to have to mix up another batch because I ended up using up quite a lot of that on the horse. and then with a number 3 brush I'm going to apply that to the cloth areas. So he's wearing like a jerkin. So that's going to end up red. Now you can see that it's almost got like a diamond pattern, like a quilted texture to it. So I'm going to do my best to highlight that up to pick up on that texture. Okay, so I'm going to apply that on all of the cloth areas, and then I'll come back and start highlighting it. Okay, so all of the cloth areas have had 2 coats now of that red and purple mix. It's still wet, but while that's wet, I'm just going to base coat his skin, because I can do that safely because it's not touching any of the other wet areas. You can see I've also blocked in all of the leather straps, the boots and things like that in Rhinox hide. So I'm using Bugman's Glow as a base coat for the skin. That's fine. I'll give that 2 coats and then I'll move on. So the other thing I thought I might as well do was pick out the hilt and the pommel of the sword in gold, and then I've also blocked in his hair in black, and then also added some black into the inside of his mouth. So the next thing I'm going to do before I start highlighting the red is I'm going to add in a couple of details, such as the heraldry on the shield, and also, in a rather masochistic sort of a way, I'm going to paint every other diamond in a contrasting colour. So the contrasting colour is going to be Xandri Dust, and then this way he'll kind of match the heraldry of the rest of my army. So it's simply a case of picking a diamond, and blocking it in, and from that just mapping out which to leave red and which to paint cream. Okay, so I'm going to carry on, do all of those, but what I will first show you is the heraldry for the shield. So I think for this one it's going to be a quartered shield. So I'm going to have I'm going to use this top rivet as my guide for where the center is. I'm going to trace a line down, I'll just turn it around, then I'll turn that into a cross. Like that. And then I'm going to block in the top left. I need to thin that a little bit. I'll give this 2 coats just to make sure it covers nicely. Anyway, so you get the idea. So just while that's drying, I'll add a few more diamonds in. They look a little rough at this stage, but as I go, I'll refine it. And then let's just give this a second layer. And what I'll do is I'll go around with that red and purple mix just to sharpen it up before I do anything else. Anyway, so I'll let that dry and then I'll refine it a bit more. I realised that I hadn't made that line particularly straight, so I'm just correcting it. Okay, so I've blocked in all of the diamonds, and then just to bring back some of the definition, I've lined them with some thinned brown just to create some shadowing. On the shield, I don't know if you can see on camera, but there's some battle damage that's been sculpted in, and I want to pick that out. So I'm going to use that thinned black and brown mix, and I'm just going to work that into the line of these dents. In the first instance, and then as I go I'll be adding in highlighting to redefine that. But before I do that, I'm going to add just a little line of silver to get the sense that the paintwork has gone right down into the metal. Like that. Okay, so I'm going to concentrate on the red areas first. So I've got, I'm going to just get some pure corn red for my first pass. Let's work that into these red corners of the shield first, leaving the purple and red mix in the furthest corners. So I'm pretty much just drawing a box here and then blocking it in. Let's bring it just in just a little bit more, like that. Then same here, but I'm going to draw like a triangle here so I'm not cutting across the battle damage. Okay. So I'll concentrate on the shield while I'm on camera, and then I'll work my way around the rest of the red by myself. So I've got this mix of corn red and Mephiston red, which I'm now going to work in. Now, what I'm going to do with this is just paint a line, a thick line, in that corner and along this edge, along that edge, and then along the bottom of that section of battle damage. I'm then going to do a similar thing with some pure corn red, Mephiston red I should say, so pure Mephiston. That. And then I'm going to use that mix of Fire Dragon Bright and Mephiston and do a finer line still. And then finally, I'm going to use the pure Fire Dragon Bright just to create a thin highlight along the bottom edge of the battle damage. Okay, so that's how the red's going to be. For the cream areas, I'm going to be gradually mixing in some Vallejo Ivory into the cream colour. That. A little bit more ivory. And then just pure ivory along the edges of that battle damage. There we go. I could go a little brighter on the orange actually. So if I add a little ivory into the orange and work that along. Yeah, that's it. Okay, so I'm going to work my way around all of the ivory and red in a similar way on all the diamonds, and then I'll come back to you and start working on the face. So next I'm going to tackle the eyes. I like to do eyes at an early stage, so I've literally just base coated the face, as you know, and I've just blocked in the eye sockets with some brown. So now what I'm going to do is use some Vallejo Ivory, and I'm going to add in the whites of the eyes. I'm going to use a fairly fine brush for this, I think, particularly because the shield's in the way a little bit. So just block it in with the ivory. Just a line. While I'm here, I'll just pick out his teeth as well. There we are. And then just use some black and dot in his pupils. Good. Now, if you're not particularly confident with eyes, particularly the pupils, one method which is possible to use is to use a fine liner pen. So you could use a 0.05 fine liner pen. So I'll just show you on the other eye that, and you can literally just dot it in. I'll just use it actually to redefine the original one. There we go. Now I'm going to start highlighting up the face. So in order to do that, I'm going to add in some Kislev flesh into the Bugman's Glow. Oh, that shake up. There we go. It's a bit thin. I'll just put some Kislev flesh there to the side for later. So I'm going to apply this to the nose and the brow, forehead, cheekbones, chin, ears, a little on the neck there. Like that. I'll work in a bit more Kislev flesh into the mix. And then highlight again. And then just pure Kislev. Followed by Kislev with some Ivory mixed in. For the last highlight. And that's really going to go bridge of the nose, tip of the chin, tops of the cheekbones, along the very edge of the brow and along the edges of the ears. we go. So now I'm going to highlight the brown areas. So in order to do that, I'm going to mix some Rhinox hide and some Mornfag brown. To create a sort of a mid-tone. And I'm going to apply that quite thin. Just going to apply that fairly generally to the leather, and then I'll work on defining it a little later. It's basically a glaze. While that's drying, I'll just do a first highlight on his hair. Now, I don't want this to be too stark, so I'm just going to mix in a bit of Incubi Darkness into the black. And I'm going to apply this along the hairs. Like that. I'll add a bit of ivory into that. Because I want the highlights to be pretty much grey rather than almost like a cartoonish blue. I'll just blend that in while it's still a bit wet. And then I'll let that dry, and then I'll pick out the hairs with a lighter shade of grey again. Before I do that, I'll work into the leather a bit more. So that glaze has had a bit of a chance to dry. So I'm now going in with pure Mornfang, and I'm doing kind of a thick edge highlight with this. I'll move back to the hair and add in a bit more ivory. most of it off the brush and then just lightly pick out the hair strands. There we go. Now, for the next highlight on the leather, I'm going to go with XV88. And I'm going to aim for a thinner edge highlight here. Just along the fingers. Along the top edge of the belt, and then around the edges of this satchel. Well, and then I'll add a bit of ivory into that for one last highlight. Sorry, went a bit quiet there because I'm concentrating, but nearly there. That'll do. Let's do the inside edges of these as well. There we go. Cool. And then I just want to pick out, there's some metal buckles here and there, just on the satchel actually, I think. So let's pick those out. Then what I want to do is highlight the gold, so I'm going to get the Liberator gold. And do a first highlight with that. And then I'm going to use the silver, just touch a bit to the ends of those buckles there first, and then I'll just highlight the corners of the hilt and the edges of the pommel. And I think he's pretty much where I want him to be. So I'm just going to wait for him to dry properly and then I'll attach him to the horse. Okay, so to attach him to the base I first need to take this wire pin out. So that's simply going to be a case of detaching it from the cork, a small pair of pliers, just grip that, give it a gentle twist, and just gradually pull it and ease it out. There we go. And there's a little bit of paint and glue residue left over, so I'm just going to gently clip that away like that. And then if I just detach this from the cork to make it a bit easier. And then he simply slides onto the saddle and then just clips into place like that. So there we are. So the last stage now will be basing. So I just need to clear all these paints in my palette out of the way, and then I can add some basing materials. Right, so I'm using a few different basing materials here. I've got some tufts from Great Gamers Grass, I've got some flower tufts from Rival Crafts, and I've got leaf litter. One of these is from Green Stuff World and the other I got from Fenris Games. The Green Stuff World is pretty much the same as the Fenris Games stuff, except it's been dyed a more kind of reddy orangey colour to represent autumn leaves. Okay, so I'm going to begin by adding some grass. Let's just move these out of the way a little bit. So I'm going to use the darkest of these tufts to begin with. I'll add one in here. It's just a case of laying it roughly where you want it and then tamping it down with a cocktail stick. Some tufts you need to add a little bit of glue, but I find that the gamer's grass ones, the self-adhesive pad at the bottom is enough to keep it held in place. And then for a little bit of variety, I'm going to use a lighter colour tuft as well. And I'm going to pop that in the back here. And again, tamp it down with the cocktail stick. That'll do for the grass. Then I'm going to add some flowers in. So I've got some blue flowers. So again, pop those in place using a cocktail stick. One more just there should do it. Now, in order to add the leaf litter to the base, what I'm going to do is sometimes I'll use PVA glue, sometimes super glue. For this example, I'll use super glue. So I'm using super glue gel, and I'm going to apply patches of this to the base. I'll drop the model. Yeah, so a patch there and one there. And then I'm going to start with the plain leaves. And in order to apply this, I'm simply just going to dip the base in and shake off the excess. Just created a little bit of a mess there, but it's okay. I've got plenty of these leaves, so what I can do is just brush these into my hand and then pop them back in the pot. And then where there's any spare bits of glue, I'm just gonna add a few of the coloured leaves in for just a little bit of variety. There we go. So I'll just shake off the excess leaves. And I'll just gently press them into the glue just to make sure that the ones that I want to stick to the base stay on the base. And there we are. So here's the finished version. Pretty pleased with them. I mean, in all, that was just the morning's worth of painting, probably about 3, maybe 4 hours. So given how quickly I was working on him, I'm pretty pleased with how he's come out. And here he is next to the leader, which I completed last week. So you can see the main difference is really that the shield on this one has got some sculpted detail, this rose design, which is really nice. But apart from that, I've used pretty much the same approach. So I've only got one more model to complete of this set, and I'm going to be painting a slightly paler horse, and that last model is the standard bearer, what I've done there is I've also magnetised the arm with the banner so that he could also have our sword as well if I wish. Okay, well, I hope you've enjoyed this video and I hope it's been helpful. I didn't aim to make it a tutorial as such, more just a step-by-step, but nonetheless I hope it's had some tips that will be handy. Alright, until next time, take care.